All right, so we are in chapter 4, and if we kind of set the context, we talked at the beginning of this class about information systems and the 5-component framework. You guys are using that in your article assignment, which is very nice: hardware, software, data, procedures, and people. So right now we're talking about hardware and software. In previous class, we talked a lot about hardware. In the last class, we talked a little bit about software. And a couple of things. Let's kind of review a little bit with software. Depending on the purpose of the software, there's software that is used to control the hardware and what you see and how you interface with a device. What is that software known as? We have this on your laptop, you have it on your phone. What do we call that software? That is operating system software, right? Like Windows and iOS and Mac OS, all the Linux units, all those are operating system software. As opposed to what? What's the other branch of software that we're more focused on? Is what type of software? It does a certain purpose. When you install them on your phone, you call them apps. It's application software. Okay? Application software does something. We talked about a little bit about application software. And we said if it has to be installed on a certain type of operating system, we call that a native application or a thick client application. But often businesses, because of all the advantages it provides, are moving more toward web applications where we just can access it with a browser. We use the power of the cloud and do that with it. We call those thin client applications. We talked a little bit about virtualization. We talked somewhat about licensing. And we also defined application software in what industry it serves. So if there's something that serves multiple industries, what do we call that software? It's healthcare, government, education, finance. What do we call that kind of software? So payroll systems, personal productivity software, communication systems are all what type, Katie? They're horizontal because they go across many industries, yes? And if it serves one industry, and you guys gave some good examples like dental software or medical imaging software or maybe Blackboard, it serves one industry, what do we call that? That is called vertical software. And sometimes we have such unique needs, there's something called one-of-a-kind software. And that's important because as a business professional, you are going to be charged with buying software or purchasing software. Now, most of the time, okay, probably over 95% of the time, when you are working in an organization, you're dealing with either horizontal or vertical, and usually you're going to acquire them, right? Because we talked about when it's software, it can be copied, so we can sell it for far less than the cost of developing. Not like a physical item, we can sell it for far less than the cost of developing. And so we buy software. We buy a payroll system. We buy a communication system. We buy a course management system like Blackboard. Yes, yes. Or like Brightspace, right? Right now, we're going looking at Brightspace versus Blackboard. Those are definitely vertical applications. Now, the only time that we really develop our own is when we have such a need that doesn't exist. Maybe it's unique to us. We do something different than anyone else. So we have to develop it. It's a business process. It's a value-added process that only we deliver. And we talk about the Department of Defense. They're the only ones that need like software to stage battles, right? And the IRS is the only one that needs software to process federal income tax forms. So that is an example of one-of-a-kind software, and it needs to be custom developed. Custom developed, more expensive, but it can add competitive advantage. Okay, so that's very important to know, right? This slide is a very important slide. So if you want to circle it or highlight it or put a star beside it, this is something that we'll be looking at later. There's also, so we talked about software, and there's a special kind of software called firmware. Anyone ever hear of firmware? Software, we hear hardware and firmware. What's firmware? Usually it's associated with something. You guys ever hear the term firmware? So we'll see this term more and more, okay? It's kind of a cross between hardware and software. It's called firmware because many, many devices, and with the Internet of Things, more and more devices, will actually have software embedded in them. Okay, and it's called firmware. Like, for example, your printer has software that's written on a read-only memory that does something. The access point that's right here in our classroom has firmware in it. It's not software that changes often, it's software that does a certain thing and runs that device. The projector has firmware installed, okay? The program's logic is designed into the device circuitry. So that's why it's firmware, because it's very closely related to the hardware itself, right? It's actually part of the circuitry. Now it's very hard to change that. Not hard to change that, but it's not as easy to change like installing software on your phone, like an application software. Usually to update firmware, what you have to do is like delete it and re-put it on, like put a brand new copy on. So usually IT professionals do those kind of things, okay? All right, so we talked back a previous slide about how we acquire software. And we said, hey, we don't typically buy software, we do what? We don't buy software, we do what? We license software. So we are licensed to use a copy. And we talked about a site license, also referred to as an enterprise license, where we say, hey, our organization has said, we have 1,000 employees, so we're going to pay one price and say everyone in our company can use this software. St. Francis has a site license or enterprise license for Office, right? So we pay Microsoft Office every year to use their software. We have a site license for Blackboard, so anyone associated with St. Francis can use Blackboard. We also have seat licenses, okay? And the reason we license a copy is because someone has developed this software, and you can't just freely use it. It's copyrighted. It's like you can't steal it. You can't pirate it. You're not supposed to pirate all those good things. So that is one branch of software. That is licensed. You pay for the license. There's also something called open source software. Okay, what is open source software? Let's talk a little bit about open source software. What is open source software? Eric?
Change it and then upload your own version.
Okay, so a couple things that are primarily associated with open source software. This, okay, that's the big thing. It's free, right? Android is free. There's a version, a personal productivity suite called LibreOffice. I don't know if you ever heard that. It's kind of like Microsoft Office, but it's free. Okay, it's open source. Okay, where does the term open source come from? Well, when we do something, okay, when we create software, there's a language that we write it in. That language might be, if it's a web page, it might be HTML5, like here. It might be, if it's an application, it might be Java, or it might be C, or it might be COBOL, okay? It's like the instructions, it's like the recipes for what this thing does, okay? When it's open source, and people protect that, so what you run is like the executable, it's like the end result, right? So you can't see like what went into the final product. People protect that, right? You can't find the source for Excel 2016. They don't make that available. That's like their recipe. They don't want people ripping it off. If it's open source, they say, you know what? Not only are we going to make that source available, and we'll make it available, but you can change it, right? You can add to it. You can create other features and functions of that. And so we said, let's use the power of the crowd, to make this software better. So Mozilla, Firefox, you guys use Firefox? That is an open source browser, meaning you can write little add-ins to it, you can change it, you can do this. So it's not supported by one company, it's supported by many companies. So, or not many companies, many people, many users, like a community of users. So let me go to a site. So for example, this is, you can go to any website you want if you're in Chrome. So this is a site that I go to every day. It's like a deal a day site. It's called mad.com, and they have like different things every day, but only one thing. So it's kind of cheap. I like it. But anyways, if this is what we see, this is what our browser hasn't interpreted, this is what we see, right? But someone designed code behind that, source code, so that my browser interprets it to look like this. if I want to see what that source looks like, I can use Control and U, and this is what the HTML code behind that page looks like. This is what someone wrote or someone designed in some kind of thing. And you see there's tags, and there's URLs in here, and there's a content tag, a title tag, a website tag, it's background colors, body colors. That is source code. Now, any program has this behind the scenes. This is the thing that controls what we see. So if it's open source, if it's truly open source, they're saying, I will give you the recipe. I will make the recipe open to you. You can do with it as you like. It's free to you. You can change it. You can alter it. You can make it better. And if you make it better, guess what? We would like you to tell us, hey, you made it better. And now that becomes part of the process. So in the business world, when we go out and want software, we have more than two choices. So one choice is to develop it yourself, right? And that, we said that's expensive. We don't often do that unless there's a material difference in what we do than other people do. You can buy it, and you can buy what we call licensed software. Someone has developed this. And then there's also open source software. So it's not something we wrote, but it's something that we can use, okay? So why open source and why license? Why would we make a choice? What are the pros and cons to these two worlds?
Open source would leave you vulnerable.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Because people trying to get into your system, and if you're a big company and you use something like that, they'd be able to get in a little easier.
Okay, so you're saying that because the source code is available, people can find loopholes easier? I guess that's a possibility. They can reverse engineer something and find something. But I can tell you, there's a bunch of like Linux server software is run on, it's open source, and it runs on, major corporation servers. And it doesn't really have that drawback or weakness. I see what you're thinking though. So why, as a business professional, why open source? Why license? Come on. Why would you go with open source? Obviously, what's the big reason you go with open source? How? Okay, so a couple things. All right, a couple things with open source. I like generate new ideas. If you buy something from a vendor, right, you're kind of tied to their innovation cycle. Like Blackboard, for example. We're tied to, if Blackboard comes out in the new release, this thing that uses cell phones better, great. But if they don't, we don't get it, right? So we're kind of tied to their innovation and their development, like one company's. If we're using open source, innovation is anyone that's going to develop to it, right? So it could be us. We could innovate something in that software and add it to that software. It could be someone at another university, right? And actually there is open source course management software. It's called Moodle. Has anyone ever heard of Moodle? Maybe you have friends at another university who use Moodle. It's open source. It's free. And there's universities, big universities that use it. Okay? We didn't. We use the proprietary. We pay money for Blackboard. Okay? Brightspace costs money as well. So why? What else? I'm looking for pros and cons on both of these. Think like a business person. Tim.
You say that the license is more like established.
Okay, I like that. So if you think about it, right? If something goes wrong with your licensed software, yes, you can pick up the phone and call a person, right? You can call a person and say, hey, this isn't working. Blackboard's not working. I bought this from you. I paid money. You need to fix it. Right? You know what I'm saying? If it's open source, there's not really anyone, there's a Moodle community, but there's not a company that we can call and say, you fix this. You're like, no, you installed our software, you're using it, that's all we give you, right? There's no support with that. There's a famous adage or famous line that IBM used to use in the 60s and 70s. IBM was a leader in selling computer hardware, like big mainframe computers and all kind of computers for businesses. And their salesmen used to use this line when they were trying to sell things. And their stuff was more expensive, right? It was IBM, it was branded. They used to tell CIOs and technology people, no one ever got fired for going with IBM. You know what I'm saying? If you go with some off-brand that was a little cheaper and it craps out, right? you may be in trouble. Like, why did you buy subpar stuff? Why did you go with this lesser brand? But as Tim pointed out, if we go with that, that's more established. So if we're a CIO that's worried, well, maybe we say, well, let's go with Blackboard, right? Let's go with the Cadillac, the standard, the topic. Very good. What else? What else? So obviously the big advantage here is what? This is a huge advantage, right? Free. Isn't free good? Don't we like free? That's a huge advantage. What are some other advantages either way? What are some other advantages either way? Yes, Kyle.
I guess for the licensing, trust the brand more, because they're an established company.
Okay.
So you might not, it might not work, like you said, because of support, so if something goes wrong.
No.
You go to fix it.
Now part of that is true, right? And that's kind of what we said before. But what has happened is we have this free software, like Moodle, for example. So what some companies do, they don't run. I mean, Moodle's not their product. It's free. Anyone can download it right now. Anyone can go right now and download LibreOffice for free. But there are companies that are called value-added providers. And what they say is, you know what, we're experts at Moodle, so you can install Moodle, or we'll help you install Moodle, or whatever open source software at your university or your organization, and we'll be your company, right? Like, I know there's no Moodle, but we are experts at it, and we will be your support, right? So, because you maybe want that, right? You still want that security blanket. You want someone I can pick up the phone and say, well, what's going on here, right? We still want that. Someone to yell at, someone to complain to. Yeah?
You said there's more collaboration.
There is. Okay, so if we think about it, open source is kind of a crazy thing, right? It's like a community of developers that come together and say, I think it should have this feature. Let's work on this. They could be undergraduate students. They could be graduate students. They could be guys in their garage. They're trying to make something better, right? So they're just collaborating on this thing. Whatever this software is, they're coming together because, programming is kind of like, I used to love to program. I don't program much anymore. But programming is kind of artistic. Like, you get to create something, right? You do. You get to, it's not like, it's different. Like, I can't paint, I can't sing, I can't play any music. But I was a pretty damn good programmer, right? And I could create something like brand new to the world. And it's kind of, it's kind of exhilarating. It is. I mean, I know I'm a geek, don't get me wrong, but I would remember, I'd stay up nights and program things. I would work on things. I would create something. I would develop something. And if you can take something that is out there with the masses and you can contribute to that, it's kind of like a pretty neat thing, isn't it? It's pretty neat. Like, hey, that thing that's used by millions of people, that one feature, I did that, right? That's neat, right? That's a neat thing. Okay, so I like that. That's a great comment, Tim. So because we have all those developers, we have all those innovations, all those great things. There's a, software. What else? Anything else?
I have a question.
Yeah, I want to hear it, yes.
How do open source companies make money?
They don't. I mean, they don't. Like, for example, like Android is supported by Google, right? So Android existed. Google said, you know what, we're going to assign some of our developers to support Android, right? But they don't really make money on Android. I could go download Android for free at any point, right? I don't pay it, I don't license it. LibreOffice, a lot of times what it is it's companies trying to take a bite out of another company. They say, well, they have a lot of market share over here, right? So, like, for example, LibreOffice, which is open source Office, I can't remember who it came out of, but it was a competitor that was kind of trying to hurt. I can't remember who exactly it came out of, but this is the Office suite, and it has an Excel package, like a spreadsheet package. It has a Word package. It has an Access package. They have little different names. It's kind of like the Word might be called Writer. Their Excel might be called Sheets or something like that. You know how when you buy off-brand cereal, it's not like Captain Crunch. It's like Salty Crick or something like that. You know what I'm saying? It's the same kind of thing like that. But they don't really make money. A lot of times, there's something that people have developed, and they kind of adopt it. A company might adopt it and push it further. Do you know what I'm saying? But a lot of times they don't make money. A lot of times it is a communal good act you know what I mean? Like something we're gonna make things better. So it's not exactly. Now, these value-added providers, they do make money, right? They say, we're gonna charge for our expertise and our services, because people wanna run Moodle because it's free, but they wanna also have someone to call. So those kind of people make money as well. But it's kind of an interesting thing. It's more altruistic, than copyrighted software, for sure. Yeah, now you can change the code. You can download the code. You can make a revision to it. You can. What's that? Well, what happens is, okay, so you could download it, change it, compile it, and make your software like that, right? And now you say, I made this change. Okay, I think it's pretty cool. Then you kind of propose it to like the community, right? And if they adopt it and test it out and say, hey, this is good, then it becomes part of the next version. You know what I mean? But there's a standard version, that everyone agreed, hey, this goes in, this doesn't go in. And a lot of times what they also have is they're very open. They have like add-ons, right? So you have this software that someone can program an add-on for, like an additional functionality that then they make that open and people can use that functionality or not that functionality. It's kind of, it's kind of like Wikipedia, if you will. You think about Wikipedia, there is a central company kind of supporting that, but who develops the content? Everyone, right? It's crowdsourced. And who controls, like, hey, this was a bad entry? The community does. They say, Kyle wrote this and he's wrong. So they delete what Kyle said, and they say, Kyle, you're banned from our community, right? Seriously, that's what they do. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about the internet. It allows people to collaborate at great distances on things that they have, maybe an interest in. So, like if I went, I put in the St. Francis one, notable alumni, and I put John Miko in there, right? I don't know how long that would last, but probably not forever, right? I mean, someone would say, well, he's not that notable, right? Because it's notable alumni at St. Francis, probably Stokes, Schwab, an alumni. I don't know who else our notable alumni are, but there's probably a handful there. And if I added myself, we should do that on screen. I'll add myself. See how long that lasts. But the community would say, nah, he's not that notable. Yes.
Does open source mean that, like, if you buy something off of a certain website, that your credit card information could be stolen out? Like easier?
No, open source isn't, it's the source of the software, okay? It is, when you run something and install something, do you ever notice you get an exe file? Do you ever, executable file? Like when you download something from the internet, you get a star.exe file, which means executable, okay? But it's all machine language. Like it's like ones and zeros. It's down at the machine level, right? You can't read it. The recipe, the source code that gets compiled to create that is what's open, okay? It doesn't mean there's holes in the software. It doesn't mean, that your credit card is in the open. It means that the recipe, the source code that was used to create this executable is in the open, okay? It's not more likely for security breaches. It's not, it's not, sometimes it's lesser quality, but not always is it lesser quality. St. Francis University is running open source software here. We're running MIS102, which is a database management system. We're using Linux Server, which is a server software. Major companies use open source software. There is, if you want to start an e-commerce business, there are a bunch of shopping cart sites, that are open source that you can just plug into your website. And it doesn't mean they're not secure at all. It just means that the source code to create the file is open. It's open. Not your information that you enter into the forums, but the source code was open. All right, so we ran out of time, but here's what I want you to do. We'll talk about this on Monday. This is in your book as well. This is on page. I think we're talking in this, and it's a good thing to talk about. In this chapter, even with our article presentations today, we started talking about the Internet of Things, right? We've been talking about the Internet of Things. And we're talking about disruption, technologies that will disrupt industries, that will disrupt processes, will change the way we fundamentally do things in the business world. And three of the ones we talked about were Internet of Things, we talked about self-driving vehicles, and we talked about 3D printing. I'm still trying to set up a 3D printing demo for next week. But this little, this is a little article on those things from CES. I don't know if you ever heard of CES, the Consumer Electronics Show. Happens every year in Vegas, where all these manufacturers and software vendors put out the latest and greatest. Like sometimes it's things they're going to come out with the next year. Sometimes they're prototypes of things they're working on. But there's a lot of media buzz around that. This is from CES 2015. I'd like you to read this, and I would like you to just jot down your thoughts on the questions on the back of this. It's 136, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we'll lead off Monday with a discussion of this, okay? So that's all I have. Have a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you Monday.